700 queens, 300 concubines, 1,000 women, all belonging to one man. But this isn't a story about lust or passion. It's far darker than that. Behind the silk curtains and gold-plated walls of Solomon's palace, 6 secrets were festering. Secrets of political manipulation, economic oppression, state-sponsored child sacrifice, and the systematic destruction of the wisest man's soul. The wisest king who ever lived didn't just fall. He engineered his own collapse, one marriage at a time. And by the time he realized what he'd done, it was already too late. This is the untold story of King Solomon's harem and the 6 dark secrets that tore Israel apart. Ask anyone about King Solomon, and they'll tell you the highlight reel. The temple, God's dwelling place on earth, overlaid with gold. Wisdom so legendary that the Queen of Sheba traveled 1,000 miles just to test him with riddles. Wealth beyond imagination. 1 Kings tells us that silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem during his reign. Solomon was Israel's golden age personified. But there's another side to the story, a darker side that doesn't make it into most sermons. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 4 delivers a verdict that should stop us cold. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God. The temple builder became an idol worshiper. How? How does that happen? The answer begins with something written centuries before Solomon was born. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, Moses laid out the rules for Israel's future kings. 3 prohibitions, 3 guardrails. First, the king must not acquire many horses. Don't trust in military might. Second, the king must not acquire many wives, or his heart will be led astray. Third, the king must not accumulate excessive silver and gold. Solomon didn't just break these commandments, he shattered them. 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horses, gold flowing in from Ophir, and 1,000 wives. This wasn't ignorance. Solomon knew the law better than anyone. He wrote about wisdom and obedience his entire life. His violation was deliberate, calculated, rationalized. And that's what makes this story so dangerous. Solomon didn't stumble into sin. He strategized his way into it. Over the next 15 minutes, we're going to peel back 6 layers of darkness, 6 secrets that reveal how the wisest man on earth constructed his own destruction, each one darker than the last. To understand Solomon's fall, we need to understand what his harem really was. And that brings us to the first dark secret. Here's what most people miss about Solomon's wives. This wasn't about romance. It wasn't about desire. It wasn't even about weakness. It was foreign policy. In the ancient Near East, a royal wedding wasn't a love story. It was a treaty signing. When a king married a foreign princess, he secured her father's alliance. No more threat of war from that direction. Trade routes opened. Intelligence networks connected. Every bride was a border secured. Look at the list in 1 Kings 11:1. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, Hittites. That's not a list of lovers. That's a map. Moab and Ammon on the east, securing the Transjordan frontier. Edom on the south, controlling the copper mines and the trade routes to the Red Sea. Sidon to the northwest, opening access to Phoenician cedar, master craftsmen, and Mediterranean shipping lanes. The Hittite kingdoms to the north, creating a buffer against Mesopotamian powers. And then, the crown jewel, Egypt. Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter. Egyptian pharaohs almost never gave their daughters to foreign kings. This was a diplomatic coup of the highest order. By the time Solomon finished, he'd built a ring of relatives around Israel. Every potential enemy was now family. And the strategy worked. 40 years of peace, no major wars, unprecedented prosperity. But here's what Solomon didn't calculate. Every princess who entered Jerusalem brought something with her. Her gods, her priests, her rituals, her understanding of how the world worked. And Solomon, the gracious host, the diplomatic genius, couldn't say no. To ban her worship would insult her father. To tear down her shrine would be an act of war. So, tolerance became accommodation. Accommodation became endorsement. Endorsement became participation. The thing that made Israel safe was the very thing that poisoned Israel's soul. And Solomon? He probably told himself he could manage it. I'm wise enough to handle the risk. I can take the benefits without the consequences. That's what every person says right before the trap closes. But not all 1,000 women were equal. And that brings us to the second dark secret. Inside Solomon's palace, a brutal hierarchy determined everything. Who ate first, who lived where, whose children mattered. 1 Kings 11:3 makes a sharp distinction. 700 wives of royal birth, 300 concubines. The 700 were princesses, daughters of kings and tribal chiefs, married with full diplomatic ceremony. They had legal rights, personal servants, formal quarters. Their children could inherit. The 300 concubines were something else entirely. Secondary wives with limited legal standing. Many were slaves, war captives, women from lower classes who caught the king's eye. Ecclesiastes 2:8 calls them the delights of the sons of men. Their children would never sit on a throne. But even among the 700, the hierarchy was ruthless. Consider Pharaoh's daughter. 1 Kings 7:8 tells us Solomon built her a separate palace. Not a room in the harem, a palace. Her own servants, her own entrance, her own world. Why the segregation? Politics, partly. She was Egyptian royalty. Mixing her with minor Canaanite princesses would be like seating a head of state with regional managers, beneath her dignity, beneath Egypt's dignity. But there's another reason. 2 Chronicles 8:11 records Solomon's explanation. My wife must not live in the palace of David, king of Israel, because the places the ark of the Lord has entered are holy. Let that sink in. He married her for power. Then he quarantined her for purity. He wanted the Egyptian alliance, but he didn't want Egyptian contamination near the sacred spaces. That's not faith. That's architecture of hypocrisy, building contradictions into the very walls of his palace. Now imagine being wife number 673. You're a princess from some small Canaanite kingdom, married off at 15 to secure your father's caravan route. You've lived in Jerusalem for 3 years. You've seen the king twice. Your son, if you have one, will inherit nothing. Across the courtyard, the Egyptian queen has her own palace. You have a room. Maybe. In Ecclesiastes 7:28, Solomon writes something that sounds misogynistic until you understand who wrote it. I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one upright woman among them all. 1 in 1,000. That's his exact count. But this isn't condemnation of women, it's confession. He searched through 1,000 wives and found no real partner, not because they were flawed, but because he never knew them. He collected treaties, not relationships. The loneliest man in Israel was the man with 1,000 wives. But maintaining this massive household required resources. And that brings us to the third dark secret. Let's talk about the grocery bill. 1 Kings 4:22-23 details the daily provisions for Solomon's court. Every single day, 185 bushels of fine flour, 370 bushels of meal, 10 fattened cattle, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, plus deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened poultry. Scholars estimate this could feed up to 30,000 people daily. This wasn't for Solomon and a few officials. This was harem logistics. 1,000 wives plus their personal servants, 5 to 10 each, plus their children, plus guards, eunuchs, musicians, cooks. A city within a city. And cities are expensive. To fund this operation, Solomon reorganized Israel into 12 administrative districts. Each district was responsible for supplying the court for 1 month per year. He deliberately redrew the boundaries, ignoring traditional tribal lines, breaking old loyalties, maximizing efficiency. But look at the map in 1 Kings chapter 4. Notice anything strange? Judah, Solomon's own tribe, isn't on the list. The 12 districts are all northern territories. The northern tribes paid for the golden cage. Solomon's own people were exempt. And it gets worse. 1 Kings 5:13 tells us Solomon conscripted 30,000 Israelites into forced labor. They rotated in shifts of 10,000, spending 1 month in Lebanon cutting timber, 2 months at home, back and forth, year after year. The overseer of this forced labor system was a man named Adoniram. Remember that name. The bitter irony is staggering. God delivered Israel from Egyptian slavery. Generations later, Israel's own king was enslaving them, building palaces for foreign wives, cutting cedars for pagan shrines. The Exodus in reverse. Fast forward to Solomon's death. His son, Rehoboam, takes the throne. And the very first thing the people say to him is recorded in 1 Kings 12:4. Your father put a heavy yoke on us. Lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. That's it. That was the first demand, the heavy yoke. Rehoboam refused, and 10 tribes walked away. The United Kingdom, the legacy of David and Solomon, shattered. The man they sent to negotiate with the northern tribes? Adoniram, the overseer of forced labor. They stoned him to death. The harem didn't just corrupt Solomon, it broke the nation in half. But the economic damage was nothing compared to what happened to Jerusalem's spiritual landscape. And that brings us to the fourth dark secret. Here's how the trap worked. When you marry a foreign princess, you can't ban her gods. That would insult her father, start a war. So you permit her worship. Then you fund it. A shrine here, a priest there. Then you attend a ceremony to show respect. Then one day you realize you're not just watching anymore. 1 Kings 11:5 says Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. Not tolerated, followed. And he didn't stop there. Solomon built high places, hilltop shrines for the worst gods in the ancient world. Ashtoreth of the Sidonians, goddess of fertility and war. Her worship involved ritual sexuality. Solomon imported Canaanite sex rites into the holy city. Chemosh of Moab, a war god fed with the blood of enemies. The Bible calls him the detestable god of Moab. And Molech of Ammon. We'll come back to Molech. But here's the detail that should make your blood run cold. 1 Kings 11:7 tells us where Solomon built these shrines. On a hill east of Jerusalem. That's the Mount of Olives. Stand in the temple courtyard, the holiest place on earth. Look east across the Kidron Valley, and there, right there, you would see the smoke rising. Incense for Ashtoreth, offerings for Chemosh, darker smoke still for Molech. The mountain earned a new name, Har HaMashkit, the mountain of corruption, the mountain of destruction. It kept that name for 300 years until King Josiah finally tore the shrines down. And the corruption spread. Archaeologists have found thousands of goddess figurines in ordinary Israelite homes from this period. One inscription discovered at Kuntilet Ajrud reads, Yahweh and his Asherah, as if the God of Israel had a consort. What Solomon permitted in the palace, the people practiced in their homes. The harem was patient zero. The nation was infected. And that brings us to the darkest secret of all, the one that's hardest to talk about. Molech worship wasn't a metaphor. Leviticus 18:21 commands, "Do not give any of your children to be passed through the fire to Molech." The phrase, "pass through the fire," meant exactly what it sounds like. Archaeologists excavating Carthage, a Phoenician colony, have found sites called tophets, thousands of clay urns. Inside, burned bones, infant bones, children sacrificed to the fire god. The Valley of Hinnom runs along the south side of Jerusalem, in Hebrew, Ge Hinnom. That valley eventually gave us the word we translate as hell, Gehenna. There's a reason for that, and here's where Solomon's guilt becomes undeniable. 1 Kings 11:7. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place for Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. The text doesn't explicitly say Solomon personally burned a child on that altar, but he built it. He funded it with the royal treasury. He staffed it with priests. He gave his Ammonite wives permission to worship there, and he protected it with royal authority. Later kings, Ahaz, Manasseh, definitely sacrificed their own sons on altars like this. 2 Kings 16:3, 2 Kings 21:6. The practice continued for generations. Solomon opened that door. They walked through it. The ancient rabbis debated his guilt for centuries, but one principle kept emerging. Scripture credits Solomon with building those altars as if he did it himself, because he had the power to stop it, the wisdom to see what it was, and he chose to look away. The man who built God's house also built Molech's altar. I keep returning to one question. Did Solomon ever stand on his palace balcony and look east? Did he see the smoke rising from the Mount of Olives? Did he hear anything from the Valley of Hinnom? Or did he just keep his windows closed? The Bible doesn't say, and that silence tells us everything. But there's one more secret, the most personal one. For this final secret, we don't need historians or archaeologists. We have Solomon's own words. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, he catalogs his achievements: palaces, gardens, slaves, silver, gold. And then, verse 8, I acquired the delights of the sons of men, many concubines. His verdict on all of it? Vanity of vanities. All is vanity, a chasing after wind. The Hebrew word is hevel, breath, mist, something that looks solid until you try to grab it. The man who had everything discovered it meant nothing. Later in Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 26, he writes something that sounds bitter. I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets. This isn't misogyny. Read it again. This is regret. He was trapped by the very women he collected, snared by his own strategy. And then there's verse 28, the saddest verse in the Bible, once you understand who wrote it. I found one upright man among 1,000, but not one woman among all these I have not found. 1 in 1,000, his exact number. He searched through 1,000 wives and found no one, not because women failed him, but because he never actually knew them. They were treaties in human form, alliances with heartbeats. He traded intimacy for influence, and in the end, he had neither. When David sinned with Bathsheba, he wrote Psalm 51. Create in me a clean heart, O God, broken, honest, restored. When Solomon sinned, nothing. 1 Kings 11 ends with God raising up enemies against him: Hadad the Edomite, Rezin of Damascus, Jeroboam, who would eventually tear 10 tribes away. The kingdom was cracking at the foundations, and then Solomon dies. No prayer recorded, no confession, no restoration. He drifts off the page in silence. Some scholars believe Ecclesiastes itself is his repentance, a book written in old age, staring at the wreckage, finally telling the truth. Maybe, but the historical narrative gives us no closure. Picture him at the end, old, tired, surrounded by 1,000 women he doesn't know, worshiping gods he doesn't believe in, ruling a kingdom that will shatter the moment he closes his eyes. He traded everything for security and found only emptiness. Vanity, he wrote. All is vanity. He wasn't being philosophical. He was being honest, perhaps for the first time in decades. So here's what we've uncovered. 6 dark secrets. 6 layers of a trap Solomon built around himself. Secret 1. The harem wasn't about desire, it was about diplomacy. And diplomacy became compromise. Secret 2. Inside those walls, a brutal hierarchy. Queens above concubines, Egypt above everyone, and hundreds of forgotten women living invisible lives. Secret 3. The economic engine that funded this golden prison ran on the crushed backs of Israelite workers, a yoke so heavy it would split the nation the moment Solomon died. Secret 4. Jerusalem itself was reshaped. The Mount of Olives became the Mount of Corruption. Pagan smoke rose within sight of Yahweh's temple. Secret 5. And in the shadow of those altars, Molech, child sacrifice, built by the king, funded by the treasury, enabled by silence. Secret 6. The hollow man, the wisest king surrounded by 1,000 women, knowing none of them, writing vanity over everything he'd built. This is the tragedy of Solomon. Not that he felt a passion. Passion can be forgiven. Passion leaves room for grace. What destroyed Solomon was calculation, the careful, rational, step-by-step compromise of a brilliant mind convincing itself that the rules didn't apply, that he was wise enough to manage the risk, smart enough to play with fire without getting burned. Deuteronomy warned, "Do not multiply wives, lest your heart turn away." Solomon heard the warning. He understood the warning. He probably taught the warning to others. And he thought he was the exception. He was wrong. His heart didn't turn in a day. It turned slowly, wife by wife, treaty by treaty, altar by altar, until the man who built God's house was building Molech's altar, until the author of Proverbs became a cautionary tale. And the kingdom he worked so hard to secure, it lasted exactly 1 generation after him. Then it shattered. 10 tribes gone. The united kingdom of David and Solomon finished. Because the harem was too expensive. Because the yoke was too heavy. Because the compromises compounded until there was nothing left to hold together. 1,000 wives, 0 lasting peace. All because the wisest man in the world couldn't see the trap he was building around his own soul. Solomon's story isn't ancient history. It's a warning, not against love, against calculation, against the quiet lie that whispers, "You can manage this. You can contain the compromise. You can control the consequences." You can't. No one can. Not even the wisest man who ever lived. The only safety isn't cleverness. It's obedience. Not because God is demanding, but because He sees what we can't. He knows where the trapdoors are hidden. Centuries later, another king stood on the Mount of Olives, Jesus, looking down at Jerusalem, weeping over the city that kept rejecting God's ways while claiming to honor His name. The same mountain Solomon had corrupted, the same city that had forgotten. He came to redeem what Solomon had ruined, to offer what Solomon never could, a heart completely devoted, undivided. And He invites us to follow, not with 1,000 compromises, but with one surrender. Here's my question for you. What area of your life are you trying to manage instead of surrender? What compromise feels too strategic to release? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this video showed you something you'd never seen before, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already.